Thank you everyone for being here. I am Jelana Bighorn, and today I am presenting on a Lakota Bahá'í approach to applying critical pedagogy in the classroom. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I am incredibly grateful to these Coast Salish peoples, these brothers and sisters, for allowing me to be on their territory. I'd like to share a little bit about my genealogical location before I begin. I was born in Seattle, Washington, spent most of my childhood growing up in the Pacific Northwest. I have Lakota and Chickasaw heritage, as well as a little bit of English and French. I grew up in a Baha'i household as well as a Presbyterian household, and I'm incredibly grateful for both of those perspectives, and they are one. And so I am so grateful to have those influences in my life. I moved to Vancouver Island as a teenager to attend Maxwell International Baha'i School, which is unfortunately closed now, but the memories of that experience are very strong, and the possibilities for what education can be when it has a spiritual foundation are something that I continue to bring into the classroom setting. As far as my teaching experience, I received my Bachelor of Arts at UBC back in 2004 with a degree in history. I continued on into the education program, becoming a high school teacher, focusing on English and mostly social studies. In the past few years, I've been able to teach some senior level courses focusing on Indigenous content, in particular BC First Peoples 12, Contemporary Indigenous Studies 12, and now adding on Social Justice 12. I'm currently re-enrolled back at UBC in my Master's of Education program called the EDAL program. It's short for the Educational Administration and Leadership degree. I'm not quite sure where I'll go with that, but the work that I'm presenting now is the basis for my thesis. So to very briefly, due to time constraints, I am just going to touch very quickly on these different layers of knowledge that I've been using and drawing on to bring into the classroom setting. The first is the medicine wheel from a Lakota perspective. Second is the Ruhi study circle model coming out of the Baha'i faith. The third is this critical education based on the work of Bell Hooks and Paulo Freire. And finally, adding on this exploration of white supremacy culture using the work of Robin DiAngelo, Jane Elliott, Joe Truss, and others. So those are the different layers of knowledge that I'll be touching upon. So before I give a brief introduction to the Lakota medicine wheel, of course, I have to acknowledge that there are many different ways of viewing the medicine wheel and different versions, and I have to say that they're all correct. The truth is too great to just have one path to it. So you may have seen other versions, but this philosophy, this belief, this understanding of humanity, that we were all one under the Creator's care, and then that we were separated to the four corners of the earth to gain mastery over the four parts that make a human being: the mental, physical, emotional, and intellectual, and spiritual, sorry. And to gain mastery over the four elements, to understand the four different stages that a human being goes through in their life. All of these different elements were kind of assigned to these races that we had conceptualized as black, white, yellow, and red. And of course, they're generalizations, but the point was that the humanity had been separated and was going to come back and bring what each group had learned together so that we could all benefit from those insights. So I share this right off the very beginning with my students, so they know that there's a place for them and that they know that all knowledge is sacred. So there will be no place for shaming where somebody gained their knowledge. We take what is useful, what is needed, and we let the rest go. So there were certain aspects of the medicine wheel which are very much prominent in the classroom setting. One is this concept of Mitakie Onwasi, all my relations. When students come in, I let them know that I see them as my relative, that they are my nieces and nephews. And because they are my nieces and nephews, I will give them my very best. and they are allowed and encouraged to give their very best back, because we're establishing a relationship. And the idea that I am a teacher and they are a student, this language is not used in that space. We are seeking truth, and we're going to learn from one another. And this idea that all of life is sacred, therefore anything that teaches us about life is sacred. Therefore mistakes are sacred, because quite often they teach us more about life than getting things right. Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. So mistakes are embraced. Mistakes are sacred. Bring them on. And so just again, the importance of relationship, that can be protected, that in a circle, you'll always have someone on the opposite side. And that's the nature of a circle. And it's fantastic because that person can see the object, whatever it is you're consulting about in the center, they can see it with clarity on their side, things that you cannot. So that's great. That's fantastic. And you can gain that knowledge as long as you maintain the relationship and the respect. And finally, this concept that it's the young ones who have knowledge that must be honored, because they are the ones who are most recently from the Creator. So we should listen to them. They have insight. So the medicine wheel, even just describing it as I am now, is it's not something that was written down. It's not like I studied it in a book. It was through teachings from my grandparents and other relatives, from my parents. It was something that we lived. And so I find it difficult to sometimes express what it is when it's so ingrained in who I am as a human being. So layering on top of that, the Ruhi Institute, which I experienced for the first time when I was about 15 or 16 years old. There's a beautiful educational model that's come out of Colombia through the work of the Baha'is there and other friends of the community. These spaces where 10 to 15 participants come together to study spiritual truths and to gain insight. And I remember the first group that I went to, I actually went with my father and a group of other Baha'is. Most of them were white. Most of them were his contemporaries, not my own. And it was fantastic. And we just spent the weekend looking through this material and discussing these spiritual concepts. And there was no concern that I was younger than the rest or that my lived experience was different than some of the others. There was just this desire to share, to find commonality, to learn. I don't think I appreciated enough at the time how profound that learning space was. But again, it is something that I bring into the classroom setting, and I think sometimes students are a little surprised by how eager I am to hear their perspective. That's not something they've experienced often. So that is one of the major influences on my teaching. And there's just a few quotes that I could share about the Ruhi Institute and how it's structured. One says that the Ruhi Institute tries to understand the process of the transformation of human society in terms of a far more complex set of interactions between two parallel developments: the transformation of the individual and the deliberate creation of the structures of a new society. So really exciting to have a cohesive program that will create patterns of behavior and thought within individuals that they can take with them for the entirety of their life, to strengthen, to learn, to grow. And at the same time, paying attention to the different structures in society that contribute to systems of oppression and how to create ones that are less likely to be oppressive. So very incredibly grateful to the Ruhi Institute and for the work that those friends are doing. So adding on to that, another layer, in my second year of university, I was introduced to the work of bell hooks. Oh, bell hooks. Just looking at the book gets me excited. Just the title alone, Teaching to Transgress, Education as a Practice of Freedom. Just reading that title was like a beacon to me. I think I already knew what was in it before I read it. So many things that she wrote spoke to me, and I'll just share two quotes. One is, when education is a practice of freedom, students are not the only ones who are asked to share, to confess. Engaged pedagogy does not seek simply to empower students. Any classroom that employs a holistic model of learning will also be a place where teachers grow and are empowered by the process. She is describing a sharing circle. She's describing a healing circle, a place where we get to be full human beings, where we get to express our emotions, our feelings, our memories in a safe place, in a place where we can trust the other members to hold those contributions and then to add on their own. This is for me to read this from a woman who was putting it into practice, 20 years ago. I don't think I appreciated as much even back then how impactful her work was going to be on me. Another quote that stood out to me, this one says that empowerment cannot happen if we refuse to be vulnerable while encouraging students to take risks. Professors who expect students to share confessional narratives, but who are themselves unwilling to share, are exercising power in a manner that could be coercive. In my classrooms, I do not expect students to take any risks that I would not take, to share in any way that I would not share. And this I've learned a great deal about, and I've made some good mistakes, and I've learned from them. And it is a very frightening step to share in a classroom setting what it felt like and what the experience was like when my father passed away, to share some of the difficult experiences that I had in high school, to let them know some of the more recent troubles or joys that I've had in my life, to go beyond the concept of what a teacher and a student is, and again come back to what it means to be a relative, a good relative, and to see that these young people are looking for more than how to add and subtract. They're looking for more than rote memory. They're looking for an experience. They're looking for a connection. So again, just so grateful for the work of Bell Hooks, and equally grateful that she introduced me to the work of Paulo Freire, who his work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is one that I am continually reading again and again. And the very first quote that I share with students in my classroom comes from his later work of his, The Pedagogy of Hope, in which he says, "If the great popular masses are without a more critical understanding of how society functions, it is not because they are naturally incapable of it, to my view, but on account of the precarious conditions in which they live and survive, where they are forbidden to know." So we read that together. They talk about it in small groups. We come back to the large group and we start to remember those times over the years when they had dared to ask a question that apparently they were forbidden to know, that it was inappropriate for them to ask. Why does school have to be like this? Why are things structured this way? Why do I have to make yet another word search? Why do I have to color yet another map? They are often met with such resistance and such resentment when they ask these questions. Over time, they just start to conform. And I slowly start to remind them that when they were in kindergarten, they would have raised their hand and been so excited to just give an answer. Whether it was right or wrong, they didn't care. And unfortunately, over 12 years, they get so beaten down and their spirits diminished that they just sit there. When they outnumber me, 30 to 1, I ask them, why aren't you revolting? Why aren't you staging a revolution? There's far more of you than me. And I go through an exercise where I purposely sit down amongst them in the circle in which I have the classroom set up. And they watch how all of my power disappears just by me sitting down and being amongst them. And sometimes they get a little bewildered, like, who is this woman now? She has no power. She sat in a chair. Who do we follow? Because they've been so well trained to follow the person at the front of the room. So using the medicine wheel, using the Ruhi study circle model, and creating this dynamic space of consultation and dialogue is really outstanding. and students are eager to participate in that. And I've been really excited to see in my research further into the work of Paulo Freire and seeing so many connections between the Ruhi Study Circle model and Paulo's work. And I'll just point out a few examples. One is this foundation of love. So Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, says, "Love is the most great law that ruleth this mighty and heavenly cycle, the unique power that bindeth together the diverse elements of this material world, the supreme magnetic force that directeth the movements of the spheres and the celestial realms. Love revealeth with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries latent in the universe." Love is so incredibly powerful. And it is, if you imagine even those little atoms that like circle around each other, they're following each other because they love each other. It really is it is the foundation of the universe. And it's exciting to see in Paulo's work, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he says, "And this fight, because of the purpose given it by the oppressed, will actually constitute an act of love, opposing the lovelessness which lies at the heart of the oppressor's violence." This movement, this act of liberation, of wanting to raise the oppressed, to remove the dynamics between the oppressor and the oppressed. This is an act of love at its very foundation. And when he goes on to talk about the lovelessness, it reminds me of the awareness that Indigenous people have of the effects of colonialism and how colonialism, yes, it impacted us. And we are facing to this day, at this moment, the continued effects of the residential school experience. But then also to take a step back and see that actually colonialism has happened to white folks long ago. And they are also dealing with the generational effects of being separated from family, from facing hardship and not having spaces for healing circles, or not having those healing mechanisms protected within their own communities. So again, just seeing the connections between the Lakota way of looking at the world and the importance of healing circles, and then looking at Paulo Freire's work, and then looking at the Baha'i faith, it's all coming together. Another connection that I was excited to see relates to the acting is learning, that you need to act in order to learn. So in the Ruhi model, it's described that each educational activity is to be in itself an enabling experience, which helps participants develop further the qualities, attitudes, capabilities, and skills of a new type of social actor, whose energies are entirely directed towards promoting the well-being of the community and whose actions are inspired by the vision of a new world civilization, which will embody in all its structures and processes the fundamental principle of the unity of the human race. Again, we're coming back together with our unique knowledges that we've gained from the four corners of the earth, and we are going to address structures. We're going to address systems of oppression, and they're going to be changed through action and learning and reflection. And so that process, which I had learned about through the Ruhi Study Circle model, was also captured in Paulo Freire's work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he says, "As we attempt to analyze dialogue as a human phenomenon, we discover something which is the essence of dialogue itself, the word. But the word is more than just an instrument which makes dialogue possible. Accordingly, we must seek its constitutive elements. Within the word, we find two dimensions, reflection and action, in such radical interaction that if one is sacrificed, even in part, the other immediately suffers." It was really exciting as I was reading through his work to see so many references that I had also seen, or concepts that I had seen in the Ruhi Study Circle model. So my research on these connections and the influences that these two have had on each other is just beginning. So unfortunately, I won't be able to go much further into that, but there are an incredible number of connections. And so this work his work has just continues to have an incredible impact in my classroom settings. I basically just put a put a quote forward of Paulo Freire, and I let the students discuss it, and we just go to these incredible places in conversation. So some of the key insights that I'd like to share from his work is that, as I said, many connections to the Ruhi Institute, which is going to require further research on my part. This affirmation that reading my reality, understanding who I am as a human being and what my lived experience has been, that I can't ignore racism, that I can't ignore how systems of oppression have affected me and continue to affect me and those around me. And then looking at the life of Abdul Baha as such a fantastic example of how to go into these spaces with fearlessness, knowing that mistakes will be made, but if they are reflected on and they're acted on again, they're actually not mistakes. They're just points of learning. Thinking about how Abdul Baha, so often when people went to him for advice, he would just tell them, "You're on the right path. just just keep going, see where it goes, figure it out, and then reflect, and then come back and write yourself." That attitude of let's just try something and see what we can learn, but also coupled with this boldness. The stories of Abdul Baha going into a synagogue and talking about the beauty of Jesus Christ. Maybe now we might kind of pull back in reticence and say, "Oh, you're stirring up controversy." But he did it with so much love because he knew thoughts and concepts had to grow. And growing is a painful process. Really, if we look at a seed in its shell, under the ground, in its like safe little setting, what it's always known, living in the dark, to suddenly have this giant green sprout coming out of its neck, that that is frightening. You wouldn't want that to happen. But that's what growth is. It looks like something completely different than what you were or what you understood before. So really looking at the life of Abdul Baha through a new lens of how bold he was and how willing he was to, with love, create challenging spaces for people to grow, which has maybe in a small way I'm trying to emulate, because I want to understand or gain some understanding of what white supremacy culture is. Again, having been introduced to this concept through the work of Bell Hooks 20 years ago, now coming back to it now when it has become so on trend and so part of the popular vernacular. Young people know about white fragility, or they think they know. They have access, through popular education to these concepts of white fragility, white privilege, but they don't have a space to consult. They don't have a space to discuss an action that they've taken, to reflect on it, to study something that is related to those actions, and then to go out and try again and to just create that dynamic. So I bring in the work of Robin DiAngelo, Jane Elliott, more recently Joe Truss, who's part of the Culturally Responsive Leadership Group coming out of San Francisco. There's a number of key elements related to white supremacy culture that I'm just beginning to understand and to start to question. Some of them being perfectionism, kind of this either or thinking, the belief that quantity over quality is preferred, the worship of the written word, defensiveness and denial, the right to comfort, the fear of open conflict, and again, drawing on the work of Dr. Claudia Black, this idea of this concept of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. All of these things must be kind of eliminated. We have to be in a professional setting. That means we have to behave in a certain way and kind of remove the human part of who we are. So all of this has resulted in, I don't quite know actually how to describe it. I mean, these conversations that I have with students every day are astounding. And they're captured in partly in a conversation I just recently had with a student who graduated, and he made a point of coming by to see me. We ended up talking for about half an hour. And he said, Miss Bighorn, I had you in ninth grade English, and there were a lot of things that you said that I didn't agree with. You're always talking about racism. You're always talking about systems of oppression. It's like I was a ninth grade boy, a white boy. What did I know? It's like there are things that you said I didn't agree with, but somehow you you said it in a way, or I don't know what you did, but in the end we all end up agreeing with you. It's like, how do you do that? I told him I've been using this model of seeking knowledge, and we each contribute to it. So actually, I told him I've been taking your insights and then I kind of make them my own, and together we created something new that we all actually agree on. And it was a really incredibly profound experience for me to sit there as a visibly indigenous teacher with this young white male student who is quite the jock and quite popular in school. And for us to acknowledge, you know, there might be a number of issues that he and I would actually sit on the opposite side of the circle on, but we respect each other so much and we value that relationship so much that I am eager to hear what his insight is. What can he see that I can't see? And he feels the same way about the perspective that I'm bringing. So that was a great outcome. That it's not always a great outcome. There's been a number of mistakes, and the students have been very generous with me. A few months ago, I was making a very big statement in that I was refusing to. I made a decision I was not going to teach World War I or II anymore. I was going to tell the students, go watch a Tom Hanks movie. You'll find out whatever you need to know, but I don't want to focus. I don't want to have a Eurocentric view in history. I'd rather have an Afrocentric view. I'd rather place the events and the figures and in the things that were happening in Africa at the center of my understanding, and then radiate out from there. So I'm not going to, teach World War II anymore. Unbeknownst to me, there was a white male student in my class who was obsessed with World War II, who would honestly, for his birthday, ask for like artifacts from World War II. And so he raised his hand and he said, well, I see where you're coming from, Ms. Bighorn. I can see, we've got to challenge a white supremacy culture. We need to have an anti-racist lens. He said, but maybe what you could do is you could just focus on the battles and the events that happened in North Africa in relation to World War II. I just sat there. I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. I was so narrow-minded and you just released me. And I just went on and on. And I think I kind of scared him because I was so excited by what he had revealed to me in my own, in my desire to do something well. I had really kind of pushed myself into a corner, and I could have really hurt him in the ignorance of my statement, in the mistake that I had made. But he was so generous in his understanding and this desire to right some of the historical wrongs, to challenge these systems of oppression, to challenge the white supremacy culture that's still within schools today, which idealizes and focuses on events in white history. That he was willing to kind of put aside something that was precious to him as well. So it's important that I share that, because this work, it comes with a lot of mistakes, but when it is based on the medicine wheel, when it's weaving in Baha'i concepts that are illustrated in the Ruhi study circle model, there is so much that can happen. And here's another example. I did not plan this out beforehand, but this is what's been happening in the past year. The resources that I have shared, that I was drawing upon, actually fit the same colors as the medicine wheel. That's what happens. That's what's been happening. This interweaving of these truths and these knowledges. And so thank you so much for being here and for listening to my ramblings. I hope that they've been insightful, and I look forward to other opportunities to share some what's happened related to this dynamic learning environment.